Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lisette, and I'm the events coordinator here at Alertus Technologies, and I will be your moderator for today. Our session today will be held from 1 to 2, and Dr. Ben Brewer, Alertus's Director of Product Management, will discuss the importance of National Fire Protection Association Code 72, Unified Facilities Criteria 04021, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and other guidance including Carey's Law, Alyssa's Law, and the Clery Act, the Higher Education Opportunity Act, and the United Laboratories 2572 standard. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you after today's session. Ben, please take it away.
Alrighty, thank you, Lizette. Well, good afternoon, everybody. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your busy day to meet with us today. Looking forward, honestly, to the questions and answers section, but we've also got some interesting things to share with you in the tail end of the webinar with regard to how Alertus can help when you're coming up against these types of challenges when you're working with a customer. And I think probably all of us, if we were to pull across myself and all of the attendees, we would probably have a wide variety of experiences in working with customers that are seeking to implement an emergency notification system that complies with this, that, or the other. What we've selected to discuss today are the most relevant standards, even though a couple of them in particular very rarely get broached in customer-facing discussions. But I wanted to talk about those two in particular with you all, just to make sure that you are aware that they're out there. And if you do have the ability to review them, you might find them useful in discussions. Now, why do I say that you might find them useful? Well, arguably, with regard to compliance and specifically to the standards that I have listed on the screen, none of these are federally mandated. The only one that even gets close to it is Unified Facilities Code 04021, which is compulsory if you are a Department of Defense entity, and we'll kind of discuss that as we go through. But that kind of indicates one of the bigger challenges that we face within the emergency mass notification sector, that being that we do not have a rigorous standard specific to emergency mass notification. So let's go ahead and get started here, and we will kind of step through these. And I did want to, before we get into this, just kind of give you an introduction to kind of set the stage a little bit further beyond what I've already shared, and talk about a couple of laws that are out there that somewhat influence the approach to implementing emergency mass notification systems within various sectors. So the first up, at the national level, we do have the emergency alerting system that replaced the legacy civil alert system that was stood up back in the 1950s in the face of the Cold War, and that is augmented by wireless emergency alerts. Largely within today's environment, these two systems are used for NOAA alerting for adverse weather in certain areas, as well as amber and silver type alerts. We also, at the federal level, we have the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, which is managed by FEMA. This system was put out and implemented to augment and enhance the old time capability of kind of taking over the television screen, the radio channel, and, again, more civil defense oriented, sending out these national level type emergency alerts over those two media. IPAWS is vastly more efficient, and it has a greater reach across all communications media, not to mention the fact that it's actually been somewhat localized. So if you're working with a customer that is a public entity, and really a public government entity, such as a state, county, or a local emergency management agency, they may have what we call an IPAWS cog, which would give them the ability to utilize systems like Alertus to inject emergency alerting into the IPAWS system. And what that does is it gives them the ability to leverage cell towers and other broadcast mediums within a clearly defined space to disseminate those alerts beyond what might be, an organic element such as an alert beacon within their Alertus notification system. So as we move into the education sector, we have the opportunity to kind of get exposed to the Clery Act, what is formerly known as the Jean Clery Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act. And this particular act, the Clery Act, requires that any public higher education institute has to have the ability to timely disseminate warnings to affected stakeholders of reported crimes as well as threats to their health and safety that are occurring on campus. They're also required to test, document, and report their efforts to comply with the Clery Act annually. If they fail to do so, they can face significant fines and they can even lose federal funding for education. Now, what's important to note with regard to the Clery Act is that the Clery Act does not require them to have a formalized mass notification system, but it most certainly encourages them to do so. So I typically tend to classify these types of acts as unfunded federal mandates because we're really getting down to the state level or even the organizational level to be able to provide that funding to be able to acquire and deploy those types of systems. Now, in addition to the Clery Act, we also have the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008. This act built on the initial act that was published way back in 1965. And the two important things that it did for higher education institutes, again, focusing on those public higher education institutes, was that it gave them formal authorization and formally established an emergency management role within these organizations. Again, no funding, but it definitely gave them the authority and a legal basis with which to pursue that type of formalized position within the organization. And equally important, it built upon other acts such as the Clery Act with regard to emergency notification, mandating that organizations must rapidly disseminate emergency information to faculty, staff, and students. The reason why I emphasize the word rapidly is that really just to kind of highlight the presence of ambiguity in many of the formal legislation with which organizations are trying to protect their stakeholders from harm. There's not really a clearly defined what is rapid. Is it 2 seconds? Is it 2 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? There's just nothing really there that helps the organization understand, am I compliant or am I not? Just like the Clery Act, the Higher Education Opportunity Act also requires that they test these systems at least once a year, and they do have a formal reporting mechanism in place to ensure that these organizations are complying with that law to test. But again, when it gets down to it, brass tacks, it could be their mass notification dissemination policy could be as simple as sending out an email and leveraging other existing infrastructure such as the overhead PA websites or things of that nature to disseminate the information without really having a formal architecture, if you will, that's unified, that provides efficient notification, allows them to be able to be more responsive in response to calamity and things of that nature. Now, Alyssa's Law is kind of the last one that I want to touch on here before I just kind of throw a casual nod off to OSHA. But Alyssa's Law is something that's relatively new on the scene. Alyssa's Law was formally adopted at the federal level 4 years ago, and it was in response to the Parkland High School shooting back in 2018, where a student with the first name of Alyssa lost her life as she was one of the shooting incidents, shooting victims, if you will. Now, one of the big findings that came out of the after action reporting specific to Parkland was the failure to timely notify local law enforcement so that they could have an effective response to that active shooting situation. Now, it's definitely arguable as to whether the outcome would have been any different than what was experienced in that particular event with the number of lives lost, 17 lives lost. But one of the bottom lines is that law enforcement was not set up for an effective response because they did not receive timely notification from the academic institute that they had gone into a lockdown. So what Alyssa's law requires, it requires the introduction of panic alarm systems within public, again, a public school focus, K through 12 in particular, but these panic alarm systems need to be installed in these public schools to be able to support instantaneous activation and direct alerting to police and emergency responders. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in the presentation with regard to how Alertus can help, because we do have a very exciting product that was released with our summer release that supports that direct alerting to police and emergency responders to support not only K through 12 and other education institutes, but also our commercial customers. So I look forward to discussing that with you as well. Now, as I mentioned, I do want to give a casual tip of my hat to the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA, because OSHA does have a requirement in there, again, arguably ambiguous, that says that any organization with 10 or more employees must have a formal means of alerting those employees of threats to their safety. And again, you know, it gets back to the ambiguous nature. It's not really specific. It's an overarching statement that says that you have to have a formal system. But again, that formal system could be picking up a whistle and blowing it, picking up a bullhorn, making an announcement, or getting more elegant and using solutions such as Alertus. So let's go ahead and get started by talking about one of the standards that you may come across a little bit more frequently than the others that I'm going to discuss, that being NFPA 72. NFPA 72 is the National Fire Protection Association code specific to fire alarm systems. It is very widely adopted within the United States, but it is not a federal standard. So it's not mandated that organizations comply with NFPA 72 at the national level, but it most certainly can be mandated at the state, county, and local government levels, and it oftentimes is. This is typically the go-to standard in the United States specific to fire alarm systems. So even though we're talking here with NFPA 72 about fire alarm systems, it is a very informative guide when it does come to emergency mass notification, because over the years, as this code has matured, Chapter 24 in particular has evolved to address what used to be called Emergency Communication Systems, or ECS, and now Chapter 24 really speaks more broadly to Emergency Mass Notification Systems, or EMNS. But again, it's a very informative guideline, and it's not just Chapter 24 that can be of assistance to us. There are a lot of other chapters, just little golden nuggets here and there throughout that code that can be assistive to an organization that is looking to implement an emergency mass notification system and do so in a manner that is representative of a widely adopted best practice. So chapters 18, chapter 7, chapter 12, you know, and some of them are as small as saying, where should you, if you have documentation, let's say, for example, you have an Alertus IP audio-visual appliance integrated with an audio circuit on a fire alarm control panel, where should you store the documentation on that device? That is actually covered within NFPA 72. And again, it gives that standard approach to formalizing an implementation and managing a program, which hopefully the majority of our customers are implementing emergency notification systems as a formal program versus just a casual wink, blink, and a nod. I've got to have this, so I'm going to check the box. Obviously, we cannot force them to go one way or the other there. We definitely work with organizations that are desperately trying to make sure that they can comply and then hoping to build upon that initial success, just as often as we're working with customers that have very, very mature programs wrapped around this. But specific to NFPA 72, mass notification systems, the way they're discussed in Chapter 24, they're really focusing on audio, visual, and textual systems. So we're talking strobes with regard to the visual. We're talking audible, typically going out over the voice-capable fire alarm panel, that system. And as far as text alerts, some of the more elegant fire alarm systems that are being deployed today in 2024 actually can have LED marquees that are a part of that formal fire alarm system. Now, Chapter 24 also applies to any elements of an emergency mass notification system that directly come into contact with the fire alarm panel. So kind of getting back to the example that I was just talking about with regard to the Alertus IP AVA that is providing audio into a voice-capable fire alarm system, it's absolutely imperative if the locality has adopted NFPA 72 as their compulsory standard, we need to make sure that we can comply with that. And that's typically achieved by ensuring that all connections and all fire alarm panel programming are completed by a NICET certified technician, and that the connections are applied to that system, again, by that NICET certified technician in an approved manner as specified with regard to NFPA 72. As you might imagine, when you're looking down at like the little sub-bullet that I have there on the screen with regard to relay integration, audio circuit integration, fire alarm control panel interface, the latter is a more elegant integration with the fire alarm system that Alertus has that gives us the ability to actually ingest fire event codes as they are output from a master panel or from disparate panels that are not unified within an organization in an effort to consolidate or to unify the alert structure specific to those alarm codes. But again, all of these types of integrations with the fire alarm panel where NFPA 72 is ruling supreme must comply with that particular standard. Some of the strengths specific to Alertus in regard to NFPA 72 is that we do have redundant communication pathways. We do have the ability to support zonability. Accessibility is more specific toward individuals who are hearing visually or both, or impaired in both of those sensory type applications, to make sure that we have the ability to ensure that anybody within a physical space has the ability to consume and respond to an alert regardless of their abilities. And obviously NFPA 72, just like so many other standards, it recommends routine testing, and where the system is integrated with the fire alarm panel, that routine testing is often monthly, and it must be formally documented in accordance with the requirements that are listed within that standard. Now, NFPA 72, as I mentioned, even though you might be working with a customer that is going to deploy an emergency notification system that's not even going to touch the fire alarm panel, one of the great things about NFPA 72 is that it recommends these communications occur across 4 different layers. And Alertus is ideally set up to be able to address these. Now, the 4 layers they're verbalized a little bit different within NFPA 72, but they do equate to our capabilities within the Alertus notification system, combined with our AlertAware product or with our integrations with other third-party systems. The first layer is the facility-based solutions, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Second layer, obviously, enterprise network-based solutions such as desktop notification, VoIP telephony. The third is the outdoor or the wide area audio solutions. And again, this is, we might not think about outdoor or wide area being a part of a traditional fire alarm system, but in a lot of large enterprises, it most certainly is, because I've been on site, large manufacturing production organizations, logistics organizations. They have annunciators outside of the facility to ensure that those are working in close proximity to the facility, but outdoors are aware of what's going on in the interior. And then the fourth layer are really the mobile solutions, such as social media and mobile applications. Now, the next standard that we'll talk about is NFPA 1600, and NFPA 1600 is one of those standards that is lesser known, has not been widely adopted as yet, but it is a standard that merits consideration nonetheless. And this standard is, it's put out as a standard for continuity, emergency, and crisis management within organizations. And it's really written so that any organization that's kind of lacking a rigorous approach to these types of disciplines, they can adopt NFPA 1600 and have a very solid guideline to help them become not only compliant if they're being evaluated as a third-party partner by a larger organization, but also meet some of the other compulsory business liability requirements that they might be facing, just in the normal course of their operation. And then, of course, ideally, what this standard is designed to do is to make sure that an organization has the ability to set up capabilities and plans so that when they do absorb an impact that disrupts their operations, they can restore operations back to that normal, whatever that normal state is, as quickly and efficiently as possible, with while minimizing the harm to the organization itself as well as its stakeholders, which could be its customers. Now, this standard does call for emergency mass notification systems. It was definitely inspired by NFPA 72, Chapter 24 in particular, but it doesn't just focus on emergency alerting. It also focuses on crisis alerting. And there are differences. There are really two different types of three different types of crisis or emergency or risk communications that occur, and I just named them: emergency alerting, risk communication, and crisis communication. They just have slightly different focuses. Crisis communication, it occurs for those of you that are about my age and you think back to the Johnson & Johnson crisis, where Tylenol was being tampered with in stores, and somebody had gotten cyanide into these capsules and people were dying. That was a crisis because it was adversely not only affecting Johnson & Johnson's customers, it was opening them up to litigation, and it was also very adversely impacting their reputation. So crisis management really kind of focuses on, let's make sure that we're taking care of the stakeholder, but we also have to take care of ourselves too. We have to make sure that all of our communications they're as open and candid as they can be without introducing additional risk, et cetera. But it's ultimately tied to trying to restore normal operations, preserve the organization's reputation, and really get back to norms while you're taking care of your customers as well. Risk communications, which is really the impetus for emergency alerting, it actually stems from the healthcare organizations, and risk communications in particular are typical types of things that we would see risk communications around, either coming from National Institutes of Health, FDA, other healthcare entities. Would be things specific to COVID-19, relevant experiences there, outbreaks of diphtheria, outbreaks of dengue fever, malaria, those types of things. And what they're trying to do is convey to the affected population, this is a threat to your health, your safety. This is what you can do to mitigate it. This is how long we believe that this threat is going to be persistent, and this is who you can communicate with to get additional information. very similar to what we try to do when we're talking about emergency mass notification. We're trying to make sure that we have the ability to effectively and efficiently get the word out to the affected population that there is a threat to their personal safety, their property, or the environment. Let them know where the vector is coming from, how persistent it is, and who they can communicate with for additional information, in addition to providing them with those always needed response actions. It does take an all hazards approach, and I think you would kind of say, yeah, that's probably a no-brainer if it's focusing on business continuity, emergency management, as well as crisis management. All hazards are really in the game here, and it's got to support that inclusivity. That's the term that is used most frequently within NFPA 72, but again, it really gets back to taking a look at the affected population as a whole community and understanding the demographic. What are the needs of the stakeholders? And then ensuring that the systems that are applied are going to address those needs, whether they're standard needs or special needs. Any emergency mass notification system that's implemented under NFPA 72 or NFPA 1600, excuse me, NFPA 72 as well, it's got to support that inclusivity. So I think you can kind of get the gist with regard to 1600. It is a very solid standard, but again, to date anyway, it just hasn't received a lot of attention specific to emergency alerting, even though it is widely addressed within that standard. The next one, equally obscure. I hope that somebody in the audience has actually heard of NFPA 3000. This standard it builds on that Chapter 24 approach to emergency mass notification, but it's got a very specific focus on active shooter and hostile event response. It's called ASHER. It is the ASHER standard. It is, again, not a regulatory requirement, but NFPA as a thought leader in this area is seeking to put out a standard to try to help organizations that are struggling to understand where should we start, what should we do. NFPA 3000 is that document that can give them the assistance, the guidance in setting up a formal active shooter response program within their organization. The emergency mass notification system is just a part of that, because a lot of it really gets back to not only how do you communicate with external entities, i.e. first responders, to get them on the scene, but how do you actually go through an analytical process to understand the existing capabilities within your organization and how best to use those as you move forward. As with the other standards, routine testing, inspection, and maintenance are a requirement if you're going to, espouse the fact that, hey, we've adopted and we're compliant with NFPA 3000, and it definitely encourages interagency collaboration. And this gets back to the emergency management approach to any incident response. Emergency management as a discipline is a very collaborative practice, because I always tend to think of an emergency manager, whoever's wearing that title, they're what I would classify as a meta leader within the organization, because they have a very broad scope for which they are responsible, but they do not have much, if any, direct authority over the other entities, either within the organization or external to the organization, that support those types of outcomes. So as you can see, interagency and even intra-agency collaboration is absolutely essential. Interagency probably takes on a heightened sense of urgency specific to this particular threat, that active shooter. What have you done? What has the organization done to establish a relationship with its local law enforcement organizations, with its first response community, period, whether it be medical or fire, in addition to the law enforcement? Do you have any existing memorandums of understanding or agreement with regard to how you're going to operate and interoperate in the event that the organization becomes the victim of an active shooter incident? How do you want us to respond? Where's the main entry point into the facility? Who's going to control that access? everything that goes into that, that helps not only inform the response plans of the first responder agencies, but it directly contributes to the response plans within the organization. And NFPA 3000 is there to provide that type of thought leadership. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'm just going to touch on this because you guys can probably read the slide quicker than I can step through it line item by line item. But the Department of Defense has done an awful lot to formalize requirements specific to emergency mass notification systems. They do have a standard UFC 042101. It has not been updated in a long time. I retired out of the Pentagon in 2008, and the standard that's in place today was in place before I retired. So it's aged, if you will, but it is definitely very, very relevant because it kind of takes the recommendations that are espoused in standards such as NFPA 72, which NFPA 72 directly informed the initial construct of 0421. And it really takes that facility-based focus. So a lot of the things that we're really focusing on with regard to UFC 0421 is when any Department of Defense entity is building or updating an existing architecture, they have to see to the emergency mass notification system needs for that building. And a lot of it has to do with understanding the existing infrastructure, any new infrastructure that's going to be introduced into the facility, and then how do they go about unifying that to make sure that they can elicit these timely notifications to affected individuals. Now, one of the really nice things about 0421 is that it is the only standard that offers objective measures for audibility and intelligibility. The majority of the other standards, they talk about audibility and intelligibility, but the measures are very, arguably, they're subjective versus being objective. So the DoD, they've basically taken a look at different organization types and have classified within the standard if this architecture, this building, falls into this category. These are the standards for any audible system within that particular building to make sure that it meets the audibility and intelligibility criteria. Is it more effective? Honestly, I think that's arguable. The DoD deployments that I've been personally involved in, where the standard has been applied in the design, they're definitely audible. For my level of hearing, they were intelligible. So, again, I think a lot of it gets back to personal needs. Obviously, ambient noise levels within the facility, personal protective equipment that's being deployed. Are people walking around with earplugs? Are they walking around with over-the-ear protection? Or is it so loud in there that they've got to have both? And I think, anybody that's had the opportunity to work with a customer that has a very, very large and loud facility, achieving audibility and intelligibility is a struggle. So, but UFC 0421 within DoD, it's an informative standard. I think, if you read it in comparison to NFPA 72, especially if you're not working within DoD, you might just say, yeah, I'd rather just, tend to leverage and lean on NFPA 72. And I wouldn't fault you in that judgment, but it's definitely very prescriptive in the event that you're seeking to compete for business within the Department of Defense sector. Now we'll talk about UL 2572. So as Lizette mentioned at the beginning, UL stands for United Laboratories. And UL standards are not regulatory requirements. They may seem like it at times, but it is not a federal mandate. UL is really out there to help organizations and solution providers articulate to their customer base that their solution has been tested to a certain standard and it has been deemed either safe or it's been deemed to be compliant with the criteria that are listed within that standard. UL 2572 has emerged in recent years as the UL standard that really tries to address the emergency mass notification criteria that are espoused in Chapter 24 of NFPA 72. Again, it is a very, very good, very informative document because it actually builds on the criteria. It doesn't just regurgitate the criteria that are listed in NFPA 72. It actually builds on them. And one of the ways that it does that is that it actually measures the effectiveness of emergency mass notification systems in relation to the 10-second criteria. 10-second criteria is an interesting discussion point because oftentimes in emergency notification, I know we do the same thing here at Alertus. Seconds mean lives, and I don't think anybody can argue that. Seconds absolutely mean lives. Honestly, milliseconds, microseconds mean lives, depending upon the threat vector. If you think about like advanced earthquake warning, we're really talking at the microsecond level. You know, as soon as that initial tremor is detected, can we get an emergency notification out within microseconds to really get people, you know, to start ducking and covering and taking those protective actions. But with regard to 2572, the 10-second criteria it's a stair-step criteria. So if you're familiar with Alertus, and if you think about a use case where an organization is activating a preset alert for a lockdown notification via a hardwired panic button, the 10-second criteria begins at the point where the panic button is depressed. And it could be a USB panic button, it could be a hardwired panic button, it could be a Wi-Fi panic button, it could be any of those. But that's what starts the clock. So from the time that panic alarm, and again, think back to Alyssa's law with regard to the panic alarm that activates these automatic notifications to the first response community, within UL 2572, from the time I press that button, I have 10 seconds to get that signal, that sensor packet into the Alertus server in this particular instance. Once the Alertus server receives it, that clock starts anew. So if it takes 250 milliseconds to get the communications packet from the Wi-Fi panic button, in this instance, to the Alertus server, at the 250 millisecond point, that clock starts anew. The Alertus server then has 10 seconds to process it and activate the alert. And it stair steps from there on out. So from the time it processes the alert and makes it available, then your endpoints have 10 seconds, et cetera. So it continues on down the stream. Now, is 10 seconds too long? Perhaps. I think that's a subject of debate, but it is a very nice criteria because it is objective. It is not subjective. It is something against which a formal system can be very clearly measured and, either demonstrate its ability to be compliant and receive the ability to publish the UL mark against a solution like Alertus has, or not. And again, I think ultimately at the end of the day for our customer organizations, which I would imagine is probably up in the higher percentiles versus being fewer, that adopt UL standards and want to ensure that a solution and its components are UL compliant, this is a standard against which these types of systems can be measured. And again, with regard to the Alertus notification system, we have been through UL 2572 testing for the Alertus server and the Alertus desktop notification client to be able to demonstrate the ability to meet all of that criteria. And we have received formal authorization to apply that UL mark to that solution. One of the tricks and triggers, I guess, with regard to UL standards is that UL certification is very specific to architecture. And with a system as complex as the Alertus notification system, we would have to have a UL 2572 certification against every single conceivable architectural design, which is just not realistic. So we focus on the core, and then when we're working with customers, let's say, for example, getting back to that IP-AVA integration with the fire panel, what we do then is we build upon that by demonstrating how the hardware device can demonstrate its ability to comply with. Is it formally listed? No, but we can very clearly demonstrate its ability to meet the needs that are espoused within this standard. So that kind of brings us to the how we can help aspect of the discussion. And we're going to focus on, we're going to kind of get back to the 4 layers just very briefly, because I know some, hopefully many of you all have been exposed to our product portfolio in your role as one of our very valuable channel partners. But I do want to just kind of talk about this, because in relation to all of the standards, and especially getting back to the mother of them all in Ben's book, NFPA 72, and the 4-layered approach, Alertus excels in deploying solutions that can communicate across 1, 2, or all 4 of those layers. And NFPA 72 recommends that organizations adopt alerting modalities from at least 2 of the 4 layers. So the very first layer, as you recall from the slide, is the facility-based solutions. Anything that's physically attached to that facility, existing infrastructure such as the fire alarm control panel, overhead PA systems, LED marquees that they may have installed. Obviously, we can install the alert beacon and any number of our alerting endpoints coupled with an LED marquee to kind of heighten that visual. Some digital signage, definitely cable television override, which even though we don't hear about it all that frequently, it still comes up now and again in organizations, higher education, healthcare in particular, where they've got a lot of televisions deployed throughout their facility. How can they amplify emergency alerting within that structure? Cable television override is a way to do that. Moving on to the next layer at the enterprise level, and some of these really kind of tend to cross levels. Digital signage is one that can cross over into the network-based solution, just depending on what that solution is and how it communicates. But at the second layer, we're really seeking to focus the IP infrastructure, and the 3 biggest that we have there are definitely the Alertus desktop notification client, integrations with either Cisco or Avaya VoIP systems, as well as integrating with other SIP voice solutions such as 3CX. Yeah, that's the only one that's coming to my mind right now. But anything that is a SIP-based architecture, Vonage is another one. But you know, we have the ability to be able to interface with those types of solutions to varying degrees, depending upon that system's capabilities and the integration pathways that are made available to us. Arguably, the most elegant integrations with regard to VoIP and IP phone integration occur with our partners at Cisco and Avaya, because they do have APIs that they extend to partners such as Alertus that gives us the ability to do a lot more with those systems and leverage them in ways that we absolutely could not leverage, you know, a ShoreTel IP phone system, for example. And then within the Alertus portfolio, our IP text-to-speech, self-amplified speakers, whether they be horn speakers within, you know, larger indoor areas, or the smaller IP speaker format that is very commonly found within office environments, again, gives us the ability to leverage the IP infrastructure in a way that we otherwise might not be able to if they were analog. And what I mean by that is that IP-related speaker deployments, we have the ability to really zone out and specifically target devices, whereas in an analog system, that can sometimes be rather challenging. And then, of course, thinking about just network traffic, the ability to integrate with our third-party partners, whether it be Genetec, Raptor Technologies, Everbridge, Rave Alert, Blackboard Connect, any number of third-party solutions out there. Another would be shooter detection systems on the shot detection side. You know, these are typically cloud-oriented solutions that require us to be able to communicate from the Alertus server with their system, either via API calls, by common alerting protocol messaging, RSS feeds, any number of different integration pathways. But these would all be executed at what I deem to be one of the most valuable layers within the four-layered structure. The third, we start to seek ways to optimize outdoor communications. And if you're familiar with Alertus's portfolio, we have the ability to address very large facilities using our high-powered speaker arrays, or we can actually come out with lower wattage outdoor horn speakers to address smaller areas, for example, a playground at an elementary school. And then finally, on the personal notification side, Alertus has its own mobile app suite with which we can communicate. We can either activate alerts via these mobile applications, or we can ensure that intended recipients down to a group level have the ability to receive and respond to emergency alerting. And very similar even to the IP layer, this is where we get into distributed recipient mass notification systems that target affected stakeholders via personal communication mediums such as email, SMS, and phone calls. All of those integrations are kind of invoked and executed at this level. But again, a little bit of crossover back to the layer 2, and then social media integrations, whether it's Facebook, X, whether it's something like Slack or Microsoft Teams, all of those occur at this level. So that brings us to probably my favorite part of today's conversation, and I'm going to step through this very quickly, but I hope that what you hear in the next couple of slides will entice you to reach out to us for a deeper dive into Alertus 911 Connect. So Alertus 911 Connect is a new product that we rolled out with the summer 24 release back in September. And it is a product within Alertus Technologies. If you're familiar, again, with the way that we initiate alerts to alerting modalities, we typically focus on what we call an alert service. So we built a specified alert service for this particular functionality, really to support Alyssa's law, but also to support anybody external to the education sector that wants their emergency notification system in certain instances to let first responders know, hey, we've got an issue at this particular location. So 911 Connect, it's got two different pathways within it. It's got an education and a commercial sector pathway. But what it does at its core is it leverages a UL certified safety platform. And you can read that as a 24/7 UL certified alarm monitoring service that connects data from Alertus to the first responder community. And that UL certification is absolutely essential because any organization can't stand itself up as you know, a 24/7 alarm monitoring service and have that unfettered access into the 911 response community without that UL certification. So this product is developed around that core, and it's developed to provide that real-time data along with verification techniques to help reduce false alarms. So if you're thinking about this and how it might be applicable in your own life, if you have a home alarm system, that home alarm system, like I use SimpliSafe, they're UL certified. And so I'm providing data out to them. And because I'm a private entity, I'm not an education entity, they have to verify the alarm before they can escalate it. Same thing holds true for commercial customers in this regard. And that's the only reason why I wanted to make mention of that, because it is different from the education alarm flow. Within the education sector, because of Alyssa's law, these entities have the ability to receive that panic alarm activation. And depending upon the alarm flow that's being applied with that panic alarm, they can automatically escalate the alarm to the first responders, whether it be law enforcement, medical, or fire. Okay. The great thing about this particular product as well is that it directly integrates with the CAD systems, the computer-aided dispatch systems in the 911 dispatch centers, what we call an ECC, or an emergency communication center. And what that means is when an alarm is activated by a constituent, there's always a notification payload anytime you activate an emergency notification system. This is no different. That emergency notification payload is going to go to our partner in this, which is Rapid SOS, and they put together what they call an alarm card, which then gets directly fed into the local municipalities ECC through their computer-aided dispatch system. So it puts everything there immediately available in that first response community, with the goal of decreasing the time that it takes to get the first responders on scene. And when you stop and you think about active shooter, the whole seconds mean lives. Statistically, and we all know you can lie with statistics, and there are definitely outliers outside of this band that I'm going to discuss. But by and large, active shooter events are over within 5 to 7 minutes of that first shot being fired. But on top of that, research has shown that first responders, i.e. law enforcement, typically, and it's in the 80th percentile, typically arrive on scene 5 to 18 minutes after that first shot being fired. So in some instances, they're arriving at the tail end of the active shooter engagement, and in others, well after the fact. Obviously, if you've got an event that ends at 7 and the first responders are getting on site at the 18-minute mark, that's 11 minutes after that last shot was fired. So this whole system is really designed and envisioned, number one, to comply with the law, but really, again, we're trying to make sure that we're getting information out to law enforcement partners as quickly and efficiently as possible so that it can speed and enable their response instead of adding additional time to that flow. Now, the information that we provide to 911, there are 5 different elements that we can provide, 4 of which are compulsory. Number 1, the location of the alarm. Number 2, the contacts at that location. Who is it that is requesting the assistance? Number 3, the incident type, which is either going to be police, it's going to be intended for the police community, the medical, or the fire community. And then it's going to have an alarm flow. And again, within Alertus, we've got 6 different alarm flows, 3 for the education sector and 3 for the commercial sector. And as you might imagine, the 3 within the education sector, they are fire, medical, and police. Same on the commercial side. It's just a difference of what happens and how the safety agent at Rapid SOS has to process that alarm before it's sent on. And then the additional alert content that might be contained within the Alertus notification is also sent forward to that ECC for their consideration to help inform how they respond. Given the fact that you all are in a partner position with us, understanding how to sell it is very important. And the way that it is sold, the main takeaway from this is there are really 2 of them. Number 1, if you're working with a commercial sector, the alarms have to be verified before they get escalated to the ECC. Now, there is a process where they step through all of the contacts, and if nobody provides a response, they can escalate it as an unverified alarm, but they have to step through that process. And as you might imagine, the number of people that they have to reach out to, which is a maximum of 3 per location, that will influence how far they have to work down in that verification. That will influence the time that it takes to get help rolling out to the location. But again, from an automated perspective, where individuals may be under duress and unable to make a call to 911, there's a very efficient way to get it out there. The other consideration with regard to how to sell it, aside from understanding whether you're working with an educational or commercial sector customer, is how it actually gets sold. So if you're working with an organization, they have one operational location and they do not want let's say it's a 17 building facility, but it's one location. If they do not want to localize the alerting to, let's say, a core of buildings, in addition to the general facility itself, it's just one license. If they decide, hey, we've got 5 critical buildings where the majority of our people are working, we want to set that up for those 5 facilities, and then a 6th for the general facility itself, which would probably be focused on like an arrival check-in gate. That would be how you would sell it. And then finally, the way that the communications occur, as I've already alluded to, the alarm notification gets out to our partner depending upon whether it's education or commercial. They're either going to escalate automatically or they're going to verify prior to escalation. And there are a lot of different variables that you can see up there on the screen that can influence the time that it takes to get those alarms out. And I realize that we're very rapidly approaching the top of the hour here. We've got about 4 minutes left. I would like to open it up for any questions that you all have that I might be able to address for you all.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, as he said, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat box. Going off of the 911 Connect, our first question is, do local authorities need to approve the use of this solution to contact the 911 dispatch center?
No, actually they do not. Because we are using a UL certified partner, it's not a requirement. It is a recommendation though. If you think back to NFPA 1600 in particular, where it encourages that interagency collaboration, we always kind of approach it from a partnership perspective when we're working with customers to ask them, what type of relationship do you have with local law enforcement? And we do encourage them, even if they live in a large municipality, reach out to them and, you know, kind of assess their temperature toward these types of solutions. There's nothing to prevent them from using it, but I think, you know, your customer having an understanding of how the local ECC treats these calls and manages these calls be very informative as you build out that opportunity.
Thanks, Ben. Our second question is, does Alertus have a recommendation regarding how we should engage with a customer where NFPA 72 compliance is desired?
Yeah, that is a very good question. These types of engagements, they can be tricky because, as I mentioned, it's not a national mandate, and even when it's locally adopted, the fervor with which NFPA 72 is implemented within the jurisdiction, it can vary significantly. And I've worked with organizations where the local fire marshal or the authority having jurisdiction, the AHJ, is very strict and restrictive. It's, you know, just a series of if-thens, and if it doesn't meet, we don't move forward. But I've worked with others to where they're a little bit more open to understanding. You know, you think about UL 2572 in particular. Some of our interfaces with fire alarm panel systems, where the UL discussion becomes very prevalent to NFPA 72, it's very important to be able to articulate to those partners how you can demonstrate compliance, you know, without perhaps having the mark. You know, when you're looking at an alert beacon, for example, it does not have a UL mark on it. However, the ways that we mitigate some of the risk by not having that mark on that device itself are through the use of UL certified power supplies or connections to UL certified PoE switches. And usually the way that we opt to engage with local authorities when it comes to NFPA 72, not really adversarial, because you could really walk right in and say, hey, look, NFPA 72 is not a federal regulation, it's not a law. That really just sets the wrong tone with the individual that you're talking with that feels that NFPA 72 is very relevant. So it's really about, you know, making sure that you have the ability to articulate how exactly the system is interfacing with the fire alarm panel, and take those forward in a collaborative type partnership means. And the one thing that I'll say to close that question out is that you all have access to myself as well as our 4 sales engineers to assist you in those discussions at any time that you guys desire that type of engagement from us.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for today. That is all we have time for. If you have any more questions or need any additional information, please feel free to email us at events@alertus.com and we'll be happy to assist you. Thank you again, Ben, and thanks everyone. Have a great day.